our last lesson in this book called Lessons for the Young Economist, which is teaching Austrian economics, which means free market. And this topic is about the business cycle. Now, in typical economic courses, which don't necessarily promote the free market, probably more from a Keynesian view, the usual business cycle looks like this. And let's see if I can remember. So there you have an expansionary period, then you have a peak period, and then you have a contractionary period, and then you have what you call TRO, which is a bottoming out, TRO or trough. I never pronounce it right. So expansionary, things are expanding, the economy's expanding, things are going good, it hits a peak, and then there's a contractionary period of time, and then it's followed by a leveling out. All right? That's how business cycles are typically explained in economics. That's what I learned in college, being taught from a Keynesian view. However, as we look from an Austrian School of Economics view, really you're just talking about the business cycle as boom or bust. And free market has this, where things are going great, very similar. Things are expanding, things are going great. But then, just as part of the free market, there's usually a bust that comes along, and that's just the normal development of the economy. That's the normal development of production and work and supply and prices going up, and then a free hand guiding the market to where there's a certain point where some businesses can't sustain that. Some businesses can't compete with others, and people get laid off and they're out of work. But if left to itself, the free hand, workers and resources are temporarily displaced, but then absorbed back into new things that are going on in the economy. And that is the typical free market, boom or bust. And it just works that way. And if left alone, it works. However, with government intervention, what happens is government tries to be compassionate and soften the blow. And so, because remember, a free market, you have those ups and downs, and it can be rough out there in the free market. It can be really, really great, but there are times when it's very hard. And you just have to weather the storm. But government doesn't like to weather the storm. Keynesian view, John Maynard Keynes said, we need to adjust the economy because if we wait for the economy to turn around, we'll all be dead if we wait long enough. Well, it's not quite that long. And what we've learned here is that when government gets involved, typically what happens is you might have your expansionary program going on, and then government lowers the interest rate, and by lowering the interest rate makes money available to people at low interest rate, and people start borrowing money. See, in a regular market, in the unregulated market, you have consumers and you have savers, and people who are consuming get to a point where sometimes they want to back off and they want to save. And when people save in a free market, those savings become the seed for entrepreneurs and others to borrow, and the interest rate is worked out through supply and demand, and then and work is planned out accordingly, and it just works and flows really well. But when government gets involved and they manipulate the interest rate, so they drop it low, below the market level, okay, they drop the interest price low, people are borrowing and investing, and if the interest rate is low enough, I mean, my goodness, entrepreneurs will start planning out business projects that'll last for a lengthy period of time. And that new money coming into the economy, see, then gradually inflates prices and wages. And things keep rising and things keep going. And things look good. On the outside, things look good. It looks like a boom. And it looks like things are just going to keep going and going and going. But there will come a time that people will look around and realize that prices are getting a little high. They're seeing the effects of inflation, of all this money that's been coming to the economy. So then the government has to put the brakes on, and by the time they put the brakes on, putting the brakes on means raising the interest rate and contracting the money supply. And that means bringing money back in and making it less available. And when that happens, people who are entrepreneurs who are maybe doing long-term business projects with those loans realize that they're in the middle of a project and now the money is freezing up and going away and they can't finish their projects, and then people get laid off and things start coming down and crashing. And that's really what happened with the Great Depression. It was the Federal Reserve that kept pumping low-interest money in the 20s, and they were booming. And then by 1929, the Fed had to realize that they had to start raising interest rates and contracting the money supply, and that's when the bust came. And so, boom and bust, business cycle. It's natural in the free market. It's dangerous when the government gets involved and tries to manipulate, because there's so many things that happen as a result that didn't need to happen. All right, and then government tries to prevent the bust by getting involved with programs, and we saw that the Great Depression era under Herbert Hoover and later FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when they tried to soften the blow for people by government intervention and government intervening, it actually prolonged the recovery. And the recovery was prolonged, and it didn't even occur until after World War II. World War II did not bail out the Depression. It did not bail out the Depression. The Depression actually continued into World War II, and it was masked and hidden by a lot of wartime spending, but really didn't recover until after World War II. It was prolonged, and that's what happens. And so if the free market boom and bust is just allowed to go on its own, it will not be, for a lengthiest time, the bust won't, and it will recover, and people will get redeployed into new areas and new opportunities, and it just works. That's the invisible hand. And I believe that God, in His divine sovereignty, He's in control. I believe God, Adam Smith was the one that talked about the invisible hand, but I believe God has put that invisible hand in place for economies to run smoothly. But mankind wants to get in place of God and wants to do only what God. And so that's the lesson on business cycles. Again, just to recap, business cycles, it's boom or bust. The free market naturally will see booms and busts. They will occur as a natural part of the free market. They usually don't last that long. People recover and they move on. When government gets involved, the bust can be difficult, it can be prolonged, and it can be more harmful than good. And again, that's been the theme of government intervention, is that usually it intends to help people, but almost always hurts the very ones it's intended to help. So business cycles, that's our lesson. And